The Gibson Amphitheater in Nashville smelled like it always did before a big show. A mixture of sawdust, electrical cables, machine oil, and the faint sweetness of someone's coffee burning on a hot plate somewhere backstage. Jake Calloway breathed it in like a man returning home after a long trip. He had been breathing that smell for 22 years, and it never got old. He stood at the edge of the main stage, clipboard in hand, watching his crew move with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this hundreds of times. Cables were being routed across the floor in careful patterns, speaker towers were being secured with steel rigging bolts, and the monitor wedges were lined up along the front lip of the stage like soldiers waiting for inspection. Everything was moving exactly as it should. "Jake, we've got the delay towers confirmed on the left," said a voice behind him. He turned. Danny Pruitt, 26 years old, and one of the best young riggers Jake had ever trained, was holding a laminated diagram of the stage layout, pointing to two sections marked in red. "Good," Jake said. "Make sure the secondary anchor points are double-checked on those. I don't want anything shifting during the show." George's crew is particular about the sound dispersion on the outer sections. "I'd repeat." Danny nodded and disappeared back into the organized chaos. Jake looked at his clipboard and exhaled slowly. This was it. After 2 decades of working smaller tours, regional gigs, festival stages that needed to be built in 4 hours and torn down in 3, he had finally landed the job that every roadie in the country music world dreamed about. Stage manager for the GEORGE STRAIT Farewell Reunion Tour. A limited run of 15 shows in venues across the American South and Midwest, celebrating one of the greatest careers in the history of country music. He had almost not applied. Donna had encouraged him to send in his resume when the posting came through an industry contact. He had laughed it off at first, said he was too old, said there were younger guys with better connections. But Donna had sat across from him at the kitchen table in their Brentwood house and looked at him with that expression she had, the one that said she believed in him more than he believed in himself. And he had sent the application that same night. 3 interviews and 2 reference checks later, he was standing on the most important stage of his career. He was 53 days away from the opening night. Jake's direct supervisor on the production was Craig Denton. Jake had known Craig by reputation for years before they officially met. Craig was the kind of man whose name came up in industry conversations with a particular mixture of respect and unease. He had been producing major country tours for 15 years, had a reputation for delivering technically flawless shows, and was known for running tight budgets that somehow always came in under projection. What the reputation didn't say, what the whispers around folding tables and loading docks sometimes hinted at, was that Craig Denton was also the kind of man who knew which favors to call in and which ones to offer. He was 48, lean and sharp-featured, with silver hair cut close to his head, and a way of looking at people that made them feel like they were being measured. Their first meeting had been cordial enough. Craig had walked Jake through the production schedule, the vendor contracts, and the technical specifications with brisk efficiency. He had been pleasant, professional, and had said all the right things about Jake's qualifications. But there was something about the way Craig paused slightly before answering certain questions, particularly questions about the audio vendor contracts, that registered in the back of Jake's mind as a small, quiet flag. Jake filed it away and focused on his work. The first 3 weeks of pre-production went smoothly. Jake's crew assembled the stage architecture on schedule, the rigging passed all safety inspections, and the initial sound checks with GEORGE Strait's own technical team went well. George himself was a professional's professional, calm, focused, and exactly as respectful to the crew as the stories said he was. He shook Jake's hand on the second day and said, "You run a clean stage, Jake. "I appreciate that." It was 12 words, but Jake felt them in his chest for the rest of the afternoon. The problem started on a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks into the build. Jake was working late, as he usually did. Most of his crew had left by 8 o'clock, but Jake had a habit of walking the stage alone after everyone else was gone, checking connections, looking for anything that might have been missed during the day's work. It was a ritual he had developed early in his career, and it had saved shows more than once. He was checking the main audio snake, the thick bundle of cables that carried all the audio signals from the stage to the front-of-house mixing board, when he noticed something that stopped him cold. 2 of the primary connection points had been improperly seated. Not accidentally. Jake had been doing this long enough to know the difference between a connection that had been bumped loose and one that had been deliberately manipulated. The locking collars on both connectors had been turned back exactly enough to create an intermittent contact that would pass a quick visual inspection but would cause signal dropout under the vibration of a live show. He stood there for a long moment, looking at those 2 connectors, turning his flashlight over them slowly. Then he heard footsteps. The amphitheater was dim, lit only by the working lights along the stage perimeter. Jake instinctively stepped back into the shadow of a speaker stack and watched. Craig Denton walked out of the stage right wing, moving quickly and quietly. He was carrying a small canvas bag, and he was heading directly toward the front-of-house equipment racks, the area where the primary amplifier systems for the main PA were housed. Jake watched as Craig opened the front panel of the main amplifier rack, reached inside with practiced hands, and made several adjustments that Jake could not see clearly from his position. Craig worked for about 4 minutes, then closed the panel, zipped his bag, and walked back the way he had come. Jake stood very still in the darkness for a long time after Craig was gone. He did not sleep well that night. He lay in bed in his hotel room. They were all staying at a Marriott near the venue during the build phase, and stared at the ceiling and turned it over in his mind from every angle. Maybe Craig had been doing legitimate maintenance work. Maybe he had noticed something during the day and come back after hours to fix it. There were explanations, but the canvas bag bothered him. The way Craig had moved, quiet, fast, precise, was not the movement of someone doing routine maintenance. It was the movement of someone who did not want to be seen. And those 2 improperly seated connectors. Jake had fixed them immediately, but he had done it with a growing unease in his stomach. He called Ray Whitfield at 9 o'clock the next morning. Ray was 61 years old and had been in the live sound industry since before Jake had started shaving. He had worked everything from small clubs to stadium tours, had developed a quiet encyclopedic knowledge of how the business operated, the legitimate side and the other side, and was one of the few people Jake trusted completely. "Ray," Jake said, standing in the parking lot of the hotel with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand. "I need to talk to you about something. Off the record." "Jake?" Ray said, in that slow, measured way he had. When a man says, "off the record," before he's even told me what the subject is, it usually means he already knows what he saw is wrong. He just needs somebody to confirm it. Jake described what he had witnessed. Ray listened without interrupting. There was a pause when Jake finished. "You know what I think Craig Denton is doing?" Ray said. "Tell me." "I think he's substituting equipment. The vendor contracts on a tour this size specify particular brands and models for the amplification system. High-end gear. Expensive. I've heard rumors, nothing I can prove, that Craig has a history of swapping out specified equipment for cheaper alternatives and pocketing the difference on the vendor invoices. The show still sounds fine to most people, but it's not what the contract says, and it's not what the artist or the promoter is paying for." Jake felt something cold settle in his chest. "The connectors I found," he said. "If the amplification has been swapped out and doesn't match the impedance specifications of the speaker system, the system will work," Ray said. until it doesn't. Under full load, with heat buildup over a 2-hour show, mismatched components can fail. Intermittently at first, then completely. George Strait's team would hear that during the show. Yes, and they'd tear the whole system apart, looking for the problem. By which time Craig has already submitted invoices for the premium gear that was never actually installed. Jake stood in the parking lot and watched a truck pull into the venue entrance down the street. "Ray," he said quietly, "how much money are we talking about? On a tour this size, with 15 dates?" Ray paused. The premium PA system spec'd for this tour runs close to $200,000 in rental and technical fees. If he's swapping it for mid-tier gear and invoicing for the premium, he let the math complete itself. Jake spent the next 4 days trying to confirm what he had seen. He was careful. He did not confront Craig. He did not discuss it with any member of his crew. He simply paid attention, the kind of deep, methodical attention that 22 years of technical work had trained into him. And he documented what he found. On the 3rd day, he photographed the serial numbers on the amplifier units in the main racks and ran them against the equipment specifications listed in the technical rider. 3 of the 6 primary amplifiers were different models than specified. Not dramatically different, not models that a non-specialist would identify at a glance, but different enough to create the impedance mismatch he and Ray had discussed. On the 4th day, he found the purchase orders. He was not supposed to have access to the production's financial files, but Craig had made the mistake of leaving his laptop open and unlocked on the production desk during a 30-minute break. Jake had not planned it. He had walked over to check a schedule document he knew was saved on that desktop and had seen the folder labeled Vendor Invoices sitting right there. He stood there for 5 seconds. Then he took out his phone and photographed what was on the screen before closing the laptop. What he saw confirmed everything Ray had said. The invoices showed payment for premium equipment. The equipment actually installed told a different story. That night, Jake sat alone in his hotel room with those photographs on his phone and made the hardest decision of his life. He went to George Strait's tour manager, a veteran named Phil Hartman, not the comedian, a different man entirely, stocky and serious and 15 years in the business, and asked for a private meeting. Phil listened. He asked to see the photographs. He examined them carefully, asked several technical questions, and then sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long time. "Jake," Phil said finally, "you understand what you're doing." "Yes," Jake said. "Craig Denton has relationships with every major promoter in this circuit. You're a stage manager. Good one, from what I've seen. But in terms of industry weight, I know what the weight looks like," Jake said. "But George's team is paying for equipment that isn't there. And the system is configured in a way that could fail during a live show. I can't sit on that." Phil looked at him for another long moment. "Give me 24 hours, he said. The 24 hours came and went. On the morning of the 25th hour, Craig Denton called Jake into the production office. Craig was sitting behind his desk with the particular stillness of a man who has made a decision and is now executing it without emotion. "We're making some changes to the stage management structure," Craig said. Jake looked at him steadily. "Effective immediately, your position is being transitioned to a consulting role. You'll be compensated for the remainder of the contracted period. But your day-to-day responsibilities will be assumed by Kevin Marsh." Kevin Marsh was Craig's nephew. He was 29 years old and had worked exactly 4 tours. "Consulting role," Jake repeated. "Correct." Jake looked at Craig Denton's face, the flat, controlled expression, the eyes that gave nothing, and understood completely. "All right," Jake said. He stood up, picked up his jacket from the back of the chair, and walked out of the production office into the Nashville morning, where the sun was bright and the air smelled like cut grass and distant rain. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Donna. "How's it going today, babe?" He stood on the sidewalk outside the venue and stared at the question for a long time before he answered. Jake drove home to Brentwood in silence, the radio off, the Tennessee Interstate unrolling ahead of him like a gray ribbon pulled tight. He had made the drive hundreds of times, but it had never felt this long. The house was a 3-bedroom colonial on a quiet street, lined with oak trees that had been there longer than the neighborhood. They had bought it 11 years ago, when Brooke was 4, and the future felt like it had a floor under it. The mortgage was manageable on 2 incomes: Jake's tour work and Donna's part-time job as an office administrator at a dental practice in Franklin. But tour work was not a salary. It was contract by contract, season by season. And the space between contracts was something Jake had always managed to keep short. He sat in the driveway for 2 minutes before going inside. Donna was in the kitchen when he walked in, a Tuesday afternoon with the light coming through the window over the sink at that particular angle that made everything look warm and ordinary. She turned when she heard him, and her expression shifted immediately, the way it shifted when she read his face before he said a word. "What happened?" she said. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where she had told him to send that application, and he told her everything. Donna listened without moving. She was 49, with dark blonde hair cut to her shoulders and brown eyes that had always seen him clearly. She was not a woman who panicked, and she did not panic now. But when he finished, there was a silence between them that had a specific texture. The texture of 2 people calculating the same numbers and arriving at the same uncomfortable total. "The other contracts," she said. "The ones you had lined up after this tour." "I don't know yet," Jake said. "Bill Hartman said he'd handle it internally. But Craig has reach. If he decides to make calls, do you think he will?" Jake looked at the table. "Craig Denton doesn't do things halfway." Donna was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his. "You did the right thing," she said. "I know," Jake said. "That doesn't make the mortgage payment." The first call came 4 days later. A production company in Atlanta, Cornerstone Live Events, that had Jake contracted for a major summer festival in June, called to say they were reassessing their staffing structure and would be in touch. He never heard from them again. The second call came a week after that. A smaller tour through the Southeast, a 3-week run with a mid-tier country act, quietly pulled his contract without explanation. Jake sat in his home office, which was really just a corner of the 3rd bedroom with a desk and a filing cabinet, and watched his booking calendar empty out with the quiet efficiency of a tide going out. He called Ray Whitfield. "Craig made calls," Ray said without surprise. "How many people did he reach?" "Jake, Craig Denton has been in this business for 15 years, and he knows where every dollar goes on every major country tour in this circuit. He doesn't need to reach many people. He just needs to reach the right ones." Jake looked at the wall above his desk, where he had tacked a copy of the production schedule for the Strait tour, the schedule he had spent 3 weeks building. "Ray, is there anything I can do? Formally, I mean. The photographs I have." "The photographs show equipment serial numbers and vendor invoices," Ray said carefully. "That's a civil matter at best, a contract dispute. The promoter would have to bring action." "Did Phil Hartman say anything about pursuing it?" "He said he was handling it internally." Ray made a sound that was not quite a sigh. "Jake, handling it internally on a tour this size, with Craig's relationships involved, usually means they replace the equipment quietly, maybe negotiate a settlement, and nobody goes on record. Because going on record means legal fees and press attention and the kind of scrutiny that nobody in live events wants on a GEORGE STRAIT comeback tour. So, Craig just walks away. Craig absorbs a loss on this particular deal and moves on to the next one. That's how these things usually go. Jake ended the call and sat in the quiet of the half-empty third bedroom and thought about what 22 years of honest work was worth in a landscape like this. Brooke noticed before he told her. She was 17, a junior at Brentwood High School, with Donna's brown eyes and Jake's stubbornness, and a perceptiveness about people that sometimes startled him. She came home from school on a Thursday afternoon, dropped her backpack by the door, and walked into the kitchen where Jake was pretending to read a production manual he had no current reason to read. She sat down across from him. She had the same habit Donna had, reading his face before he spoke. "Dad," she said, "are we in trouble?" He looked at his daughter, 17 years old, college applications on the horizon, a future that he had spent 22 years of stage calluses trying to build, and he felt something shift in his chest. "We're handling it," he said. "That's not what I asked." He put down the manual. "We have some financial pressure right now. It won't last. I'm working on it." Brooke looked at him with those sharp brown eyes. "Mom told me you got pushed off the GEORGE STRAIT tour because you reported something." He was going to have to talk to Donna about what she shared with Brooke. But looking at his daughter's expression, not scared, not fragile, but serious in the way teenagers rarely were, he decided this was not the moment for that conversation. "That's accurate," he said. "And now, people are canceling your contracts." "Some?" "Yes." Brooke was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Was it worth it?" It was not an accusation. It was a genuine question, the kind you only ask someone you respect. "Ask me in 6 months," Jake said. She looked at him for another moment, then nodded once and picked up her backpack and went to her room. But she paused in the doorway and said, without turning around, "For what it's worth, Dad, I think you did the right thing." He sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she was gone. The money situation became real approximately 6 weeks after Jake lost the tour. Donna pulled the spreadsheet up on the laptop one Sunday evening. She was the one who tracked the household finances, had always been the one. And they sat together and looked at it. They had savings. Not lavish savings, but the careful, deliberate accumulation of years of managed spending. Enough to cover 4 months of mortgage and household expenses without any income coming in. 4 months was not comfortable, but it was not catastrophic, except that Jake's industry, live touring, had a particular rhythm. The major booking decisions for the fall season were made in late spring. If he did not have contracts signed by May, he was looking at a gap that pushed well past the end of the year. "I can pick up more hours at the practice," Donna said. She said it simply, without resentment, which somehow made it harder for Jake to hear. "Donna, it's fine. Dr. Whitmore has been asking if I'd take on billing coordination. It's a pay increase." She looked at him steadily. "This is not the end of the world, Jake. It shouldn't have to be your problem to solve," he said. "Everything about our life is both our problem to solve," she said. "That's the deal." He looked at her across the kitchen table. This woman who had spent 22 years building a life around the unpredictable rhythm of his career, who had raised their daughter mostly alone through long tour seasons, who had never once asked him to choose the safer path, and felt a gratitude so large it had nowhere to go except into silence. He reached out to every contact he had. He wrote emails and made calls and had coffee with people he had worked with over 2 decades. And he got a range of responses that fell into a distinct pattern. People who had worked with Jake, riggers, sound technicians, lighting directors, stage carpenters, responded warmly. They knew him. They knew what he was. Several of them said quietly that they had heard what happened and respected how he had handled it. People who reported to Craig Denton's level, production managers, tour promoters, venue booking directors, were cool vague, or simply did not respond. The industry had a membrane. Jake had always known it was there, had navigated it successfully for 2 decades by being too good at his job for people to look past him. But he had never tested it directly before. Now he was on the wrong side of it, and it was thicker than he had imagined. 3 weeks into the effort, his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize. A Nashville area code, but not one he had in his contacts. "Mr. Calloway?" A woman's voice, professional, slightly formal. "My name is Linda Forsythe. I'm an investigative reporter with the Nashville Business Chronicle. I've been doing research on production contract irregularities in the live touring industry, and your name has come up in connection with the GEORGE STRAIT tour. Would you be willing to talk?" Jake sat with the phone against his ear in his home office, looking at the empty booking calendar on his wall. "How did you get my name?" he said. "I'm not in a position to share sources," she said, "but I want you to know that I've corroborated several elements of what I understand occurred on that production independently. I'm not asking you to be my source. I'm asking if you'd be willing to talk, on background initially, if you prefer." Jake thought about Craig Denton, about Phil Hartman's careful phrase, "handling it internally," about Kevin Marsh running the stage on a GEORGE STRAIT show. "I'll think about it," he said. "Of course. Here's my direct line." He wrote it down. He did not call her back that day, but he did not delete the number. Ray Whitfield came through Brentwood on a Thursday, between a job in Memphis and a festival gig in Knoxville, and Jake met him for dinner at a diner on Franklin Road that they had been going to for 15 years. It was the kind of place that still had laminated menus and bottomless coffee, and the particular ambient noise of a room full of people who were not performing for anyone. Ray looked across the table at Jake and said, "You look like a man who's been running calculations in his head for 6 weeks straight." "That's accurate," Jake said. "Talk to me." Jake talked. He laid out the full picture. The lost contracts, the financial timeline, the call from Linda Forsythe, the silence from Phil Hartman's office, the growing sense that he had done the right thing in a way that the industry was going to make him pay for indefinitely. Ray listened in the way he always did, completely, without filling the pauses. And when Jake was done, he poured more coffee and was quiet for a moment. "The reporter," Ray said. "What did your gut tell you about her? That she's legitimate? That she's been doing actual research, not fishing? What's your hesitation?" Jake looked at his coffee. "If I talk to a reporter, it becomes public. Craig will know it was me. The industry relationships I've been trying to hold together." "Jake," Ray said quietly, "what industry relationships are you holding together? Be specific." It was not unkind. It was the directness of a man who had known Jake for 20 years and had earned the right to say hard things. Jake looked at the table. "Not many," he said. "Right now, you are being quietly frozen out, and it is working. Craig doesn't need to make a single aggressive move because silence is doing the job for him." Ray set down his coffee cup. A reporter with corroborating information changes the dynamic. It is no longer Jake Calloway's word against Craig Denton's relationships. It becomes a documented story in a business publication. It could also close every remaining door in the industry for me. "It could," Ray said. "Or it could open ones you can't currently see." They ate in silence for a while, the diner noise washing around them. "There's something else," Jake said. Ray waited. "Phil Hartman called me 2 days ago." Ray raised an eyebrow. He said, and I'm quoting directly, that "the matter has been addressed to the satisfaction of all production parties involved, and that he appreciated my professionalism throughout the process." Ray was quiet for a moment. They settled with Craig. "That's what it sounds like. And what about you?" "I got a check last week for the remainder of my contracted fee. No explanation, no documentation. Just a check. Hush money, Ray said. It's technically contract fulfillment. Jake. Ray looked at him steadily. It's hush money. The check is the closing of a door. They're hoping you cash it, nod, and go away. Jake looked out the diner window at the Nashville street. A couple walked by with a stroller. A man in a Vanderbilt sweatshirt checked his phone at a crosswalk. I haven't cashed it, Jake said. Ray nodded slowly. I know, he said. That's why you look the way you look. He called Linda Forsythe on a Friday morning in April, standing in the backyard of his house while Donna was at work and Brooke was at school. The oak trees were putting out their early spring leaves, and the neighborhood was quiet, except for a lawnmower somewhere down the street. Mr. Calloway, Linda said when she picked up. I wasn't sure I'd hear from you. I want to understand what you have, Jake said. Before I say anything, I want to understand the shape of the story you're writing. That's fair, she said. What I have is this. I have documentation of 3 separate tours in the past 7 years, where production contracts specified premium audio equipment that was not actually installed. In each case, the invoices were submitted for the premium gear. In each case, the production manager of record was Craig Denton. Jake was quiet. I have one former vendor representative who will speak on record. I have financial documents obtained through a source I am protecting. And I have the technical specifications and serial number records from the Straight tour, which I obtained through a separate channel. She paused. What I don't have is a first-person account from someone directly involved in the most recent case, someone with technical expertise who can speak to what the irregularities meant in practical terms, what the safety implications were. That is the piece that elevates this from a financial story to a story about what happens to real people in the live events industry. Jake stood in his backyard and looked at the oak tree at the far end of the yard, the one Brooke had climbed as a child, that still had the remnants of a wooden platform he had built for her wedged in its branches. If I talk to you, he said, I need you to understand something. Go ahead. I'm not doing this because of what it did to me professionally. I mean, that's part of it. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. But the reason I reported it in the first place was because that system, in the configuration Craig left it, could have failed during a live show. In an amphitheater with thousands of people, equipment failure in a live production doesn't always mean a bad sound mix. Sometimes it means a safety event. There was a pause on the line. When Linda spoke, her voice had changed slightly, more focused. Can you explain that specifically? In terms a non-technical reader would understand? Mismatched amplifier and speaker impedance under sustained load and heat buildup can cause amplifier failure. Amplifier failure in a high-power system can cause electrical events. In a worst case, and I'm not saying it was a certainty, I'm saying it was a risk. You're talking about electrical fires in equipment racks that are housed in close proximity to stage structures, cables, and crew. Another pause. You documented this. I have photographs of the serial numbers and the technical specifications. I have records of the 2 improperly seated connectors that I personally corrected. Mr. Calloway, Linda said carefully, I'm going to need to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Are you willing to speak on record? With your name attached? He looked at the oak tree, at the old wooden platform, at the April sky above the Brentwood neighborhood where he and Donna had built their version of a life. Yes, he said. The story ran 5 weeks later, on a Thursday morning, in the Nashville Business Chronicle's digital edition under the headline, Sound and Fury: How Production Fraud in Country Music's Live Events Circuit Puts Artists, Crew, and Audiences at Risk. Linda Forsythe's byline was above a piece that ran nearly 4,000 words, included documents, serial number comparisons, and quotes from 3 sources. one anonymous, one the former vendor representative, and one Jake Calloway, identified by name, position, and 22 years of industry experience. Jake read it at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning before anyone else in the house was awake. He read it twice, slowly. And when he was done, he sat for a long time with his hands flat on the table, and the early morning light coming through the kitchen window. His phone started buzzing at 7:15. The first wave of responses was what he had expected. 2 production companies with whom he had ongoing, if strained, relationships sent terse emails essentially ending those relationships. One person he had considered a friend for 12 years sent a text that said simply, "Not smart, Jake." But the second wave was different. By 9 o'clock, he had 3 voicemails from people he had never met. A sound engineer in Austin, Texas, a lighting director based in Nashville, a stage carpenter who had worked the Southeast Circuit for 18 years. All of them said, in different words, the same thing. "I saw the story. I've seen this before. Thank you for putting your name on it." At 10:15, his phone rang with a number he recognized. Phil Hartman. He answered. "Jake." Phil's voice was careful, measured. "I've read the piece." "I figured." A pause. "Craig is already talking to attorneys." "He can talk to whoever he wants," Jake said. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Phil said something Jake had not expected. "The promoter and I had a call this morning. Jake, what you documented, particularly the safety implications, that's something we should have addressed more aggressively when you brought it to us. I want you to know that I am aware of that." Jake was quiet. "I'm not calling to ask you to walk anything back," Phil said. "I'm calling because I think I owe you that." "Okay," Jake said. "For what it's worth," Phil added. "Kevin Marsh lasted 8 days. We've been running stage management by committee since then. It's been a disaster." Despite everything, Jake felt a small, involuntary smile cross his face. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said. "No, you're not," Phil said. And his voice, for the first time in the conversation, had something that might have been a wry note in it. The story spread faster than Jake had anticipated. By the end of the first day, it had been shared widely in live events, industry forums, and Facebook groups. By the second day, it had been picked up by Polestar, the industry's most read trade publication, which ran a follow-up piece with additional sourcing. By the end of the first week, 3 other former Craig Denton employees had contacted Linda Forsyth with additional documentation. Jake was not watching social media. He had never been much of a social media person. But Brooke was, and she gave him nightly briefings with the careful casualness of someone trying not to show how much they were invested in the outcome. "There's a thread on the live events Reddit," she told him on the 4th night, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop. "It's pretty long. Most of it is sound people and riggers talking about how common this kind of thing is." "Is it bad?" Jake asked. Brooke read for a moment. "No," she said. "It's mostly people saying it needed to be said." He looked at his daughter, 17 years old, her whole future ahead of her, watching her father navigate the most difficult season of his professional life, and thought about what she had asked him weeks ago in the kitchen. Was it worth it? He still did not have a clean answer, but the question felt less like a wound than it had before. Craig Denton's attorneys sent a letter to Jake's home address 12 days after the story ran. Jake read it standing at the kitchen counter, Donna at his elbow. The letter claimed defamation, demanded a retraction, and threatened civil litigation. Jake photographed the letter and sent it to Linda Forsyth, who forwarded it to the Chronicle's legal team. He also, for the first time, made a call to an attorney of his own, a woman named Carol Evers, who specialized in employment and media law and had been recommended by Ray Whitfield. Carol read the letter, asked Jake several precise questions about the documentation he had, and then said, "This letter is designed to frighten you. Let's talk about what your position actually looks like. What Jake's position looked like, Carol explained over the next 90 minutes, was considerably stronger than Craig Denton's attorneys were implying. The photographs were time-stamped and unaltered. The serial number documentation was independently verifiable. Linda Forsyth's reporting had been additionally corroborated by sources Craig's team had no knowledge of. And Craig's track record, now being assembled across 3 separate tours by a reporter who was clearly not done, presented a pattern that would be difficult to reframe as a single disgruntled employee's mischaracterization. "He might still file," Carol said, "but if I were his attorneys, I would be advising strongly against it." Jake drove home from Carol's office in downtown Nashville with the windows down, the April air warmer than it had been, and something loosening in his chest for the first time in weeks. The weeks that followed the story's publication were the most disorienting of Jake's professional life. Not because things were getting worse, but because they were changing in ways he did not yet know how to read. The hostile responses from Craig's orbit continued. An industry association newsletter ran a vague piece about the importance of discretion in contract disputes that anyone who had followed the story would recognize as a response to it. 2 or 3 people Jake had counted as professional allies went quietly silent. But there were other things happening simultaneously, and they pulled in a different direction. A production company based in Austin, Meridian Stage Productions, reached out with a preliminary inquiry about a stadium tour they were staffing for the fall. The inquiry came through a project manager named Tom Abernethy, who was direct and professional and said, without preamble, "We saw the Chronicle piece. We run clean productions. We're looking for a stage manager with your level of experience, who also has the kind of professional integrity you demonstrated. Are you available to talk?" Jake sat with the email for an hour before responding. Not because he was uncertain about wanting to respond, but because he was trying to understand what had shifted. For weeks, the industry had felt like a wall. Now one door was open, and he could not quite trust it yet. He called Ray Whitfield. "Meridian," Ray said immediately. "Tom Abernethy. I know the operation. They're legitimate, very clean. Tom has a reputation in the Austin and Texas circuit that is the opposite of Craig Denton's. They found me through the story." "Yes," Ray said. "That is not a coincidence. Tom is exactly the kind of producer who has been watching Craig operate for years and had no mechanism to push back against it. He is looking at you as a signal, someone who knows the work and has demonstrated that they won't compromise it. Or he's looking at me as a cheap hire because I'm vulnerable," Jake said. "That's possible," Ray said, "but I don't think that's Tom Abernethy. Talk to him. See what the conversation feels like." The conversation with Tom Abernethy felt solid. Tom was 55, a trim, deliberate man with a West Texas accent and the habit of looking directly at whoever he was talking to. They met for coffee at a place on Broadway in Nashville that Tom had chosen. Neutral territory, Jake noted, not a power move. And Tom spent the first 20 minutes asking Jake about his methodology, his crew management approach, his process for handling technical problems during live shows. Practical questions. Industry questions. Then Tom said, "I want to be transparent with you. I've been aware of Craig Denton's operation for several years. I've lost 2 vendor relationships because I wouldn't play his game, and I've watched several people in this industry look the other way because it was easier. When I read the Chronicle piece and saw your name on it, I made a note to call you." Jake looked at him. "What's the project?" Tom described it. A fall arena tour, 28 dates across the South and Midwest. A major country act, not a name Jake could mention publicly yet, with a full technical production that needed a senior stage manager with strong crew leadership experience. "The timeline?" Jake said. "Contract would start June 15th for pre-production." Tour runs September through November. Jake did the math quietly. June 15th was 6 weeks away. The financial timeline he and Donna had built showed pressure starting around that same window. "I'd need to know more about the production specs," Jake said. "And I'd want to talk to the technical director before I commit." Tom nodded. "That's exactly the right answer." He held out his hand across the table. "Let's set up a second meeting." At home, the household had found a kind of equilibrium that was not comfortable, but was functional. Donna had taken on the billing coordination role at the dental practice, which added 12 hours a week and a modest pay increase. She did not complain about it. She also did not pretend it was ideal. Jake had been noticing for weeks, the specific cost that this season was extracting from his wife. Not in any way, she stated directly. Donna did not state things that way, but in the tightness around her eyes at the end of long days, in the way she sometimes went quiet for stretches of the evening that she would ordinarily have filled with conversation, in the small sighs she probably did not know she was making. One evening in late April, he came downstairs at midnight and found her still at the kitchen table with her laptop, working through billing records, a cup of tea gone cold beside her. He sat down across from her. "Donna." She looked up. In the kitchen light, at midnight, with the day's tiredness on her face, she looked exactly herself, not diminished, not resentful, just real. "I need to say something," he said. "Okay," she said. "I made a decision that cost this family, and you have been carrying part of that cost every day without once making me feel like I was wrong to make it. I want you to know that I see that, and I want you to know that I understand what it means, what it costs." Donna looked at him for a moment, then she closed the laptop. "Jake," she said, "do you remember when Brooke was 6? And she told that girl at school, what was her name? Caitlin something. Caitlin Forrester. Brooke told Caitlin Forrester that she was being mean to the new kid at recess, and Caitlin's mother called me and was furious, and Brooke lost her only close friend for most of first grade." Jake remembered. It had been a miserable few months. "Do you remember what you told Brooke at the time?" He did. "I told her that she did the right thing, and that the right thing sometimes costs you in the short term." Donna looked at him steadily. "You are not a different person than the person who told your daughter that, and I did not marry you to watch you become a different person." She picked up her cold tea and looked at the cup. "Now stop being dramatic at midnight and help me with these billing codes, because I genuinely do not understand how a crown replacement gets categorized under 3 different billing codes." Jake laughed, a real laugh, the kind that had been scarce for weeks, and pulled his chair around next to hers. Craig Denton's legal threat faded. Carol Evers had been right. The attorneys apparently advised against filing. The letter was the final aggressive move. What followed was silence. The particular silence of a man who has looked at his options and found them smaller than he expected. Linda Forsythe called Jake in early May with an update. 2 more former Denton production employees had gone on record. The Polestar follow-up had attracted attention from the American Federation of Musicians and the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. The IATSE Union, which represented a significant portion of live event workers, who were now in early discussions about whether to pursue a formal investigation. "It's moving slowly," Linda said. "These things always do. But it's moving." "Will Craig face anything real?" Jake asked. Linda was quiet for a moment. "That depends on how far the union investigation goes, and whether the promoters who settled with him decide to cooperate with any formal process. I can't promise you a specific outcome." "I'm not asking for a promise," Jake said. "I just want to understand what's realistic." "What's realistic," Linda said carefully, "is that Craig Denton's ability to operate the way he has been operating in this industry is significantly diminished. Whether that translates into formal legal consequences depends on factors neither of us controls. A pause. But Jake, he does not come back from this story intact. That I can tell you. Jake thought about that for a long time after the call. He had not done what he did for outcomes. He had done it because the alternative, staying silent while a rigged system ran under a show that thousands of people would attend, was something he could not live with. But he was human enough to feel something in what Linda had said. Not satisfaction exactly. Something quieter than that. The specific low-frequency sense of a thing having been properly accounted for. The meeting with Tom Abernethy's technical director went well. Marcus Webb, yes, a man actually named Marcus, not on Jake's forbidden list, was sharp, detail-oriented, and exactly the kind of technical partner Jake worked best with. They spent 3 hours going through the production specs for the fall tour and arrived at a clear mutual understanding of how the stage management and technical direction roles would interface. At the end of the meeting, Marcus said, "Tom told me what happened on the Straight tour. I want you to know, that kind of thing is not how we operate." "I figured," Jake said. "Otherwise, I wouldn't be here." Marcus smiled. "Fair enough." Jake drove home to Brentwood that evening with the Meridian contract terms in his head, and something that was not quite optimism, but was in the same general territory. A cautious, earned sense that the ground was not as gone as it had seemed. He pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment. 53 days ago, he had been standing on the stage at the Gibson Amphitheater, thinking he was at the beginning of the most important chapter of his career. He had been right. He had just misidentified the nature of the chapter. The confrontation he had been half expecting, with Craig or Craig's people, or some representative of the forces that had been working against him, did not come in the dramatic form he had imagined. There was no showdown, no climactic scene. What came instead was a phone call. A Tuesday afternoon in mid-May, his phone rang. No name on the screen, but he recognized the area code as Nashville. "Jake Calloway," he answered. A pause. Then a voice he recognized. "This is George Strait's management office. Is this Jake Calloway, formerly stage manager on the—" "Yes," Jake said. "Hold for one moment, please." He was in his driveway. He had just gotten back from a hardware run. He sat on the hood of his truck in the afternoon sun and waited. The voice that came on the line was not George Strait. It was a man who introduced himself as Dale Hutchins, George's personal manager of 20 years. Dale spoke in the unhurried, assured way of someone who had managed a major career for a long time and had no reason to rush anything. "Jake," Dale said, "I've been aware of what happened on the production. I want you to know that George has also been made aware." Jake said nothing. "George asked me to make this call," Dale continued. "He wanted you to know that he is aware of what you did and what it cost you. And he wanted me to express, on his behalf, that your professionalism and integrity on that production were noticed and are appreciated." Jake sat on the hood of his truck in the Brentwood afternoon. "That means a lot," he said, and his voice was steady. "There's also a practical matter," Dale said. "We are in early discussions about a follow-on series of dates next year. A different format. Smaller venues. More intimate. The production is still being structured, but George expressed specifically that he would want to know your availability." Jake looked at the oak tree at the end of his driveway. "Tell George I appreciate that very much," he said. "And tell him my availability is something we can definitely discuss." "Good," Dale said. "I'll be in touch." The call ended. Jake sat on the hood of his truck for a while after that, in the May afternoon, with the Nashville sky above him and the oak tree at the end of his driveway putting out its full spring canopy. And he thought about the shape of things, about how the road from that backstage moment with a flashlight and 2 improperly seated connectors had led here, and about all the places it had gone in between. He called Donna. She picked up on the second ring. "How did the hardware run go?" she said. "Good," he said. "I also just got a call from GEORGE STRAIT's management." A pause. And it went well." Another pause. The particular silence of someone absorbing news carefully. Then, Jake Calloway. "Yeah, I want to hear everything. But I need to finish these billing codes first, and then I will come home and you will tell me every single word of that conversation." "Deal," he said. He could hear the smile in her voice when she hung up. June came to Nashville in the way it always did, with heat that settled into the pavement and stayed, with thunderstorms that built up in the late afternoon and crashed through by evening, with the particular quality of light in the long summer evenings that turned everything golden and slightly unreal. Jake signed the Meridian contract on June 9th, 6 days before the pre-production start date. He signed it at the kitchen table, with a pen Brooke had given him for Christmas 3 years ago. A good pen, weighted and solid. The kind of pen you used for things that mattered. And Donna sat across from him and watched him sign it with an expression he had seen on her face before. Not celebration, but something more durable than celebration. The look of someone witnessing the end of a hard chapter. He dated it and set down the pen. "Okay," Donna said. "Okay," he said. Pre-production for the Meridian tour began on June 15th at a warehouse complex east of downtown Nashville that Meridian used as their staging facility. It was a sprawling, well-organized space with high ceilings and clean concrete floors. And when Jake walked in on the first morning with his clipboard and his coffee, he felt something he had not felt in months. He felt right. His crew was a mix of people. Some he knew from previous work, some new faces. He spent the first day learning names and watching how people worked, doing the same reading of a crew he had been doing for 22 years. Who was precise, who was fast but careless, who asked good questions, who listened when given direction. Tom Abernethy stopped by at noon and walked the space with Jake for 20 minutes, asking questions, listening to Jake's preliminary observations, and then said, "You've got what you need?" before heading back to the production office. "Yes," Jake said. And he did. Ray Whitfield came to Nashville in late June, and they had dinner at the same diner on Franklin Road. Ray looked at Jake across the laminated menu and said, "You look different." "Different how?" Jake said. "Less like a man running calculations." Ray put down the menu. "More like a man who finished the math." Jake thought about that. "The math isn't finished," he said. "Craig Denton hasn't faced anything formal yet. The union investigation is ongoing. The Meridian job is good, but it's one job. The fall season isn't guaranteed." "None of that is what I'm talking about," Ray said. Jake looked at his old friend across the table. "No," he said. "I know it's not." What Ray was talking about was something harder to name but easier to feel. The thing that had shifted in Jake in the months since the night he had stood in a dim amphitheater with a flashlight and seen something he could not unsee. It was not that the world had been corrected. The world was what it was. Complicated, partial, resistant to clean resolutions. Craig Denton might or might not face formal consequences. The industry membrane would always exist. Some doors would stay closed. But Jake Calloway had stood up in the gap between what was happening and what should have been happening. And he had stayed there. And he had not moved. Not when it cost him the biggest job of his career. Not when it cost him contracts and income and the security of a calendar full of work. Not when a legal threat arrived at his home address. Not when the silence of people he had counted as friends became a kind of answer. He had not moved. And in not moving, he had found out something about himself that was more valuable than any booking calendar or industry relationship. Something that could not be taken by Craig Denton or anyone else, because it was not the kind of thing that lived in external circumstances. Brooke graduated from Brentwood High School on a Saturday in late May, 3 weeks before Jake started at Meridian. The ceremony was held in the school's gymnasium, which was large enough for the graduating class, but only barely. And the summer heat was already making itself known through the building's overtaxed air conditioning. Jake sat in the folding chair between Donna and his mother-in-law, Beverly Hammond, who had driven down from Clarksville for the occasion, and who cried steadily and without apology from the first processional note. When Brooke's name was called, Brooke Eleanor Calloway, Jake watched his daughter cross the stage in her blue gown, accept her diploma with a handshake and a smile, and scan the audience until she found them. She found Jake first. She gave him one quick, deliberate nod. Not a wave, not a big gesture, just that single nod that said, "I see you." And then she was past the stage and back to her row. And Jake sat with the gymnasium noise around him and felt something he could not have articulated if he had tried. In the car on the way to the restaurant afterward, Brooke was in the back seat with Beverly, and Donna was driving, and Jake was sitting in the passenger seat watching Nashville go by outside the window, and Brooke said, out of nowhere, with the particular casual directness of a teenager saying something important as if it weren't, "Dad, I told my friend Cassidy what happened. With your job and everything." Jake turned slightly in the seat. "Yeah? She asked me if you were mad that you lost the tour. I told her you weren't. Not really." "That's accurate," Jake said. "She didn't understand that." Brooke paused. "I tried to explain it. I said, you lost the thing you thought you wanted, but you kept the thing you actually were." The car was quiet for a moment. Donna glanced at Jake from the driver's seat with an expression that was half smile and half something more careful. Beverly, in the back seat, made a small sound that was probably the precursor to more crying. Jake looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, 17 years old, heading to the University of Tennessee in the fall on a partial academic scholarship. The scholarship she had earned herself in the years he had been away on tours, and she had been building herself into someone quietly formidable. "That's pretty good, Brooke," he said. "I know," she said, with the absolute zero-ceremony confidence of someone who had grown up around people who said exactly what they meant. The Meridian tour went into full pre-production on schedule. Jake's crew found its rhythm in the second week. That particular cohesion that a good crew develops when the people in it trust each other, and the stage manager running the operation knows what they are doing and is not afraid to say so clearly. Jake ran his operation the way he always had: precise, transparent, intolerant of shortcuts, respectful of the people doing the work. Marcus Webb turned out to be everything the initial meeting had suggested. Technically sharp, communicative, with an ego calibrated correctly for the job rather than for his own reflection. They worked well together from the start, and by the fourth week of pre-production, they had developed the shorthand that you only develop with someone who approaches the work the same way you do. Tom Abernethy stopped by the staging facility every few days, walked the floor, and asked questions. He was not a micromanager. He trusted the people he hired and let them work. But his attention was real. He knew what he was looking at. One afternoon in the third week, Tom stood beside Jake at the edge of the main stage structure. They were doing an initial PA hang, and said, "How does it feel?" Jake looked at the PA array going up, at his crew working with focused efficiency, at the clean, well-organized space. "It feels like the job," Jake said. Tom nodded. "That's the right answer." In July, Linda Forsythe called with an update. The IATSE investigation had moved into a formal review phase. 3 of the 5 promoters involved in Craig Denton's tours over the past 7 years had agreed to cooperate with investigators. Craig's production company had suspended operations, which Linda described carefully as a voluntary suspension pending review, though her tone suggested she placed limited weight on the word voluntary. "Will it result in formal charges?" Jake asked. "That's in the hands of investigators and potentially prosecutors at this point," Linda said. "What I can tell you is that the cooperative promoters are providing documentation that goes well beyond what I published. This is not going away." "How are you doing?" Jake said. It was not a question he had asked before. Their relationship had been professional, source, and reporter. But something about the summer day and the particular weariness in Linda's voice made him ask. She paused, apparently surprised by the question. "I'm good," she said. "This is the story you hope for when you're in this work. The one where the documentation is real and the public interest is clear." Another pause. "I'm glad you called me back, Jake. I'm glad you called in the first place," he said. August arrived and Jake's pre-production moved from the Nashville staging facility to the first venue city, Charlotte, North Carolina, where the load-in for the opening dates would begin. He drove down I-40 with his truck loaded, and the windows down and the Tennessee-North Carolina border rising up ahead in the Blue Ridge, and he thought, as he often did on drives between jobs, about the long chain of decisions and accidents and choices that had brought him to any given moment. He had gotten into live events at 19 because a friend had offered him a day of loading truck for $100. And he had discovered that he liked the work, the physical problem-solving of it, the way a stage came together from nothing and then disappeared again, the specific world of people who built things that lasted one night. He had stayed because he was good at it, and because it mattered to him in a way that was hard to explain to people who had never stood in the dark of a finished venue, before doors opened, and felt the rightness of something built correctly. He had almost left. Once, in his mid-30s, when Donna had gone through a health scare that turned out to be less serious than the first terrible week suggested, and the cost of being away so much had become almost unbearable to contemplate. He had considered getting out, finding something stable and local, but Donna had said, lying in a hospital bed after a procedure that had gone well, looking at him with clear eyes, "Jake, don't make decisions about your life from a scared place. Make them from a real place." He had stayed. Now, in August, driving into North Carolina with the Blue Ridge ahead and the Meridian Tour ahead, and a call from GEORGE Strait's management somewhere in the future, he was trying to follow that same instruction, not making decisions from a scared place, making them from a real one. The Charlotte load-in went smoothly. His crew was sharp and coordinated, the venue staff was cooperative, and the technical system, the system that was actually specified in the contract, with the serial numbers that matched, with the impedance values that were correct, went up cleanly and passed every check. There was a moment, late on the second night, when Jake was doing his solitary walkthrough of the stage. His ritual, unchanged across 22 years. And he came to the main amplifier rack and opened the front panel and shone his flashlight on the units inside. He checked the serial numbers against the spec sheet. Everyone matched. He stood there for a moment in the quiet of the Charlotte venue, with the empty seats stretching back into the darkness and the stage structure around him solid and correctly built. And he felt something that was simple and complete. He closed the rack panel and continued his walk. Donna visited for the opening weekend. She came down on a Friday, drove herself from Nashville in the Highlander with an audiobook playing and a travel coffee mug, and the quiet competence with which she approached every logistical challenge. She checked into the hotel, changed, and met Jake backstage 2 hours before showtime. She had been to many of his shows over the years, enough to understand the world, not so many that it had lost its capacity to impress. She stood beside him in the stage right wing, and watched the house fill up. And when the lights went down, and the opening act took the stage, and the sound came up, correct? Full, the way it was supposed to sound, she leaned slightly against his arm. He put his arm around her shoulders, and they stood together in the dark of the wing, listening. During a quiet moment between songs, she said, close to his ear so she could be heard without being too loud, "This is a good show." "Good production," he said, "because of good people." He looked at the stage, at the lights, at the crowd, at his crew, positioned at their stations, doing their jobs. "Yeah," he said. The fall tour ran 28 dates across 9 states, from Charlotte through Atlanta, Birmingham, Memphis, Little Rock, Oklahoma City, Dallas, Houston, and back north through Kansas City and St. Louis. It was the kind of tour Jake had spent 22 years building toward. Not the most glamorous in terms of artist profile, not a household name on the marquee, but a precisely run, technically clean operation with a crew that knew their work, and a management team that respected it. He had 3 nights off during the run. He spent 2 of them in hotel rooms reading and watching baseball. He spent 1 of them in Dallas, where he had no particular connection, calling Brooke, who had moved into her dorm at the University of Tennessee 3 weeks prior, and who answered the phone with the carefully maintained casualness of someone trying not to admit they were happy to hear from a parent. "How's school?" he said. "Hard," she said. "Good, hard. What's your hardest class?" "Intro to statistics." "I don't understand why I need statistics." "You'll need statistics," he said. "That's what the professor says too. It's annoying when everyone agrees." He laughed. "How's the roommate?" "Fine. She's from Memphis. She's very organized." "That's a virtue." "I know. It's also a little intimidating." A pause. "How's the tour?" "Good," he said. "Clean production. Good crew." "Are you happy?" she said. Simple, direct, the way she always was. He sat in the Dallas hotel room with the city lights visible through the window and thought about the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Yeah," he said. "I am." "Good," she said. "You should be." The tour ended on a Saturday night in St. Louis, at a venue that held 12,000 people and was sold out. Jake stood in the stage right wing for the closing number, his usual position, close enough to the stage to respond to any technical issue, far enough back to see the full picture, and watched. The closing number was a ballad, the kind of song that quiets a room. Not silences it, but quiets it in the specific way that live music can quiet 12,000 people simultaneously. Something that never stopped being remarkable to Jake, no matter how many times he experienced it. The lights came down to a single warm wash. The crowd stilled. And in the hush, he could hear, just barely, underneath the music, the building's ambient sounds, the ventilation, the distant rumble of the city outside, the structural creaks of a large space containing 12,000 held-breath people. He had been in hundreds of moments like this. He had been on the side of hundreds of stages, watching hundreds of shows, and the feeling never left. The feeling of a thing working exactly as it was designed to work. The music finding the room receiving it, the crew invisible and correct behind it all. This was why he did this. Not for the contracts or the booking calendars or the industry relationships. Not for the reputation that preceded him into rooms, or for the acknowledgement of people who controlled who worked and who didn't. Not even, though it mattered more than he could fully articulate, for the phone call from Dale Hutchins that had said George asked me to make this call. For this. For the moment when a stage full of people and light and sound became, briefly, one thing. The song ended. The crowd erupted. Jake stood in the wing and clapped. On the drive back to Nashville after the strike, the full crew had loaded out through the night and into the Sunday morning, the professional choreography of dismantling something that had taken weeks to build. Jake stopped at a diner outside of Louisville, Kentucky, and sat in a booth and had eggs and coffee, and looked out the window at the interstate in the early morning light. His phone had a text from Donna. "Welcome back to the same time zone. Drive safe. I made the corn chowder." He smiled at his phone. A second text came in while he was looking at the first. Also, Brooke called, and she got an 84 on the statistics midterm. She said to tell you she still doesn't understand why she needs statistics, but she's better at it than she expected. He laughed, alone in a diner booth at 7 in the morning somewhere in Kentucky. A genuine laugh that a tired middle-aged man produces when he has been given exactly the information he needed. He typed back, "On my way. 2 hours out." The corn chowder sounds perfect. Then he put the phone in his jacket pocket and looked out the window and finished his coffee. Dale Hutchins called on a Thursday in November. The discussions about the intimate venue tour had progressed. The format was confirmed: 12 dates, small to mid-sized theaters, a stripped-back production designed to feel close and personal. The kind of show that suited a certain point in a great career. Not a spectacle, but an event. Dale was measured and professional, as he had been before. But there was something underneath the professionalism that Jake read as genuine. "Jake," Dale said, "I want to be straightforward with you about something." "Please," Jake said. George is aware of the full sequence of what happened on the previous production. He has been from early on, more aware than I initially conveyed in our first conversation. A pause. "What you found on that stage, the configuration you corrected, the connectors you fixed, that was a real safety issue. George's technical people have confirmed that. If the show had run on that system under full load..." "I know," Jake said quietly. "George knows too," Dale said. "He wanted me to tell you that specifically. Not as sentiment, as a factual acknowledgement. You made that show safe. And then you reported what created the problem. And you took what came from that without going away." Jake sat in his home office, the third bedroom with the desk and the filing cabinet, and looked at the wall where the empty booking calendar had hung for so long in the dark months of the spring. The calendar was not empty now. "I appreciate that, Dale," he said. "Very much." "The offer stands," Dale said. "If you're available and interested, we want you as stage manager for the theater run. First rehearsal date is February 17th. Jake looked at the calendar. "February 17th. I'm available," he said. "And I'm interested." He told Donna that evening at the kitchen table, over the corn chowder she had made from a recipe her mother had given her 30 years ago. The kitchen was warm, and the November dark was outside the windows, and the house was quiet, in the way it was quiet now. A different kind of quiet than the spring's financial anxiety. A quiet that was simply the quiet of a house with one fewer person in it. Brooke away at school. Donna listened to the full account, and then was quiet for a moment, her spoon resting in the bowl. "February 17th, she said. "Yes, that's 5 days after Valentine's Day." "I know," he said. "I already thought about that." She looked at him. "What did you think about it?" "I thought that a man who just got offered a GEORGE STRAIT theater tour had better make very good plans for the 14th. She considered this with the gravity it apparently deserved, then nodded once. "Acceptable," she said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. Outside, the November wind moved through the oak trees in the yard. The old ones. The ones that had been there before the neighborhood, before the house, before any of them. The trees that held the remnants of a wooden platform in their branches. The platform a father had built for a daughter who had grown up and gone to college. and gotten an 84 on a statistics midterm, and was becoming, in a university dorm room 3 hours east, whatever she was going to become. The wind moved through the trees, and the kitchen was warm, and the corn chowder was good, and Jake Calloway sat at the kitchen table in his house in Brentwood, Tennessee, and thought about February 17th, and about the shape of a life that had been tested and had not broken, and about the specific, unglamorous, irreplaceable satisfaction of a thing built correctly. 3 months later, on a cold February morning, Jake Calloway walked into the rehearsal hall of the Ryman Auditorium in Nashville, Tennessee, the mother church of country music, the room where the Grand Ole Opry had lived for decades, the room where the walls themselves seemed to know what music was, and set down his clipboard and his coffee and looked at the space. It smelled like wood and history and the specific electricity of a room that had held 100 years of performance. His crew was arriving behind him, filling the space with the sounds of a production day beginning. Gear cases rolling on concrete, voices calling across the room, the first technical checks running through speakers. He picked up his clipboard. Across the room, a man walked in through the artist entrance, unhurried, a little taller than you expected, with the particular ease of someone who had been doing this for 50 years and was still doing it because he loved it. George Strait. He crossed the room and extended his hand to Jake. "Good to have you here," George said. "Good to be here," Jake said. Simple. Enough. True. He turned to his crew and raised his voice over the room's morning noise. "All right, everybody, let's get to work."